Hello, it's I Have a Dream night. It's August 27th or so. So actually, it's August 27th. I just didn't even realize that. Wow. Maybe I should have done this tomorrow. The speech was given on August 28th, 1963. And I guess I can't wait 2 more years to do it, or it wouldn't do us any good. But it's now 2021, so that would have been quite an anniversary to be 2023. But yeah, so August 28th. All right, we're going to move on, even though it would be a little more poetic to do it on the anniversary to the day. Um, this speech is one that you've been hearing about your whole life. You've been studying it in school. You've been hearing about it. You've been hearing about the most famous parts of it. You know, the parts that he was improvising, the I Have a Dream part. You know, that's largely improvised. You can see he's not reading, he's not looking up, or he's not looking at anything at that point. But it's been said that maybe he did practice some of these parts of the speech before in prior sermons, but a lot of this was just fresh for this March on Washington. And, just think about 1963. I mean, this is before the Civil Rights Act was passed, and it's, right in the middle of, or getting toward the middle of, the Vietnam era. We've got all kinds of issues with, civil rights brewing and leaders being killed. I mean, this was the year that a few months after this, actually, November 1963, John F. Kennedy was killed. So assassinated. And this is what started a stream of assassinations, because in 1965, then we lost Malcolm X. I would love to spend a lot of time on Malcolm X, but for our purposes, we won't be able to. But let me just say that he was sort of the opposite of Dr. King. He wanted the same thing, but he went about it in an opposite way. In fact, he made fun of the speech. He made fun of the I Have a Dream speech and said, oh, he thinks everyone's going to go and be all kumbaya after this, but it's not going to do anything. Malcolm X was the kind of person, I always say it this way, if you punched Dr. King, he'd pray for you. If you punched Malcolm X, he'd knock you down the stairs. Their goal was equality, but Dr. King didn't want segregation. He thought we could integrate, and Malcolm X said, ain't gonna work. And he said, the only thing I like integrated is my coffee. Of course, he was working toward changing his mind on a lot of things, but then he was killed in 1965. Malcolm was, not by white folks like we would have guessed either, but by people who were in his own community, who were jealous of his success and popularity. And because, well, there's backstory to it that some of you may know, but too long that we don't have time for here. But Malcolm X probably would have been one of our greatest leaders had he lived. They both died when they were 39 years old, Dr. King and Malcolm X. It's quite a comparison, but they were a few years apart. Malcolm died in 1965 when he was 39, and Dr. King was then assassinated in 1968 when he was 39. And then we had also Bobby Kennedy, who announced the death. Robert Kennedy announced the death of Martin Luther King at a campaign speech once. When he had found out that he was killed, he announced it at one of his own campaign speeches. And then a few months later, he was killed. So just tons of sadness in this era. So it was tumultuous. Like, think about 2020. It was a lot like that, only we had a different kind of war going on. I was going to say we had a war going on. We always have wars going on in America, I guess. But it was, quite something. So, so much time has passed, right? But when we look at this now, we're looking at it with persuasion in mind. All right. I want you to think of it this time, even though I know you've seen a lot of it. Some of you have never seen it all the way through. You've only heard the famous parts, or you have and you don't remember. Some of you have been hammered to death with this. But most of the time, when I ask my classes, have you seen the whole speech or heard the whole speech? And most people say no. And they have not seen the video all the way through, unless they were asked to in school. I've seen it 100 million times, and it still does something for me. So I'm hoping that it doesn't feel too redundant to you, or that you feel like there's nothing in it for you. We're going to look at it today with persuasion in mind. All right, I know I'm rambling. I'm going to have to stop it every now and then too, because I have to, so we can talk about it. It's the only way we could do it. So bear with me on that. It's summertime. It's the end of the summer. Imagine going to Washington, D.C. in this heat. I mean, it's 1,000 degrees out today. It wasn't so different back then in August. And look how they're dressed. If this was today, we'd be wearing like Bills jerseys and chili pepper pajama bottoms. I mean, we definitely don't have the style that we used to. Although these may be more leader types. But look at even just the common person who showed up is well dressed. Anyway, Dr. King did not know how many people were going to show up. He was writing right up until the last minute. The March on Washington.
At this time, I have the honor to present to you the moral leader of our nation.
The moral leader of our nation.
I have the pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
So if you're reading along, and I hope you are, I hope you have your copy printed because it's not going to work very well for you otherwise. That introduction, I'm happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. A very short introduction, okay, and then he gets right into it.
I am happy to join with you today.
Okay, that's what it is. That first introduction was an introduction, but this is where Dr. King says, I'm happy to join with you in what will go down as the greatest. And how did he know? How did he know that this was going to go down as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation? You know, how could he have known that? But if you think about it, it's 2021. Can you think of a speech that has been any more popular than this one? I can't. Still. It's just hard to do things a second time. There will never be another Woodstock, right? You can't repeat with as much impact as the first time something happens. You just can't. And so he's right. And the fact that he knew that is pretty surprising.
In what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation.
Okay, so of course the Lincoln reference there, and 5 score years ago, a score is a span of 20 years, and so if you think about Lincoln's speeches, Gettysburg, and so on, he would use language like that in some of his speeches, 4 score years ago, and so on. So he's paying tribute to him in more ways than one.
This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. So we've come here today to dramatize the shameful condition.
Okay, so that text there, that introduction, okay, we're thinking about thesis statements and how to have a preview for your speech, how to set the tone, or an essay, how to set the tone. If you're trying to be persuasive, what do you want? That has to be said early on. What are you here for? What do you want me to do? Why am I here? It's hot out. What do you want from me? Right? Is the audience. And, so this very short introduction, and then straight into it. The reference to Lincoln, okay? And sure, we freed the slaves, but, right? Okay, and so, but 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, repetition for effect there, right? The life of the Negro is still badly crippled. 100 years later, 100, look at that. He says it 4 times there. It's repetitive for effect, okay? And to emphasize, okay? It's also working like a thesis statement. 100 years later, there's still a big problem, right? And so it's very poetically written, it's beautifully written. He's used to preaching, he's used to speaking from the Bible, he's used to writing, and he's a word guy, he's poetic. I mean, if you broke this whole thing up into the right kind of line breaks, this could be a poem easily. I keep meaning to do that, but I haven't yet. So, and it doesn't need to be done, but I would find it interesting. Get rid of some of the articles like the us and the thes and the ands, and right, it would be a poem. Easy. Okay, so 100 years later, the Negro is still languishing in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. What have we come here for? We've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. To dramatize a shameful condition. Now, when you're trying to convince people to do something or think differently about something or act, if you're trying to have like a call to action, usually you'd say, we must this, or we should that, or we have to this. But he's just saying it's a shameful condition. He's saving a call to action till the end. Go back to Mississippi, go back to this place and that place. You'll see that later. So there is a call to action, but he saves it. Right now, we're just going to show you what a shameful condition this is. Okay, and so let's take it from there. He has established the purpose so far with enough background information that we can continue without having to spend any more time on that.
In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note which every American was to fall have. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds.
See this smile right here? Why are they smiling? Look at the crowd reaction. I know it's hard to hear, but smiling and cheering after he says America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned, instead of honoring this sacred obligation. America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. And why are they smiling and even laughing in some cases? Because that's a really great way of saying it. Yeah, say what you said you were going to do, America. You can't write us a check and then there's no money in there. You can't promise something and not do it, right? So yeah, very effective metaphor there with the check. Pauses for applause. Smart.
But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice.
We've come to do this. So that, again, that purpose of why they're there is set. That tone is set.
We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism.
Have to create a sense of urgency or you've got nothing if you're trying to be persuasive.
Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time
Repetition.
to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time.
You know, he's a poet, and he's just a poet. The way he reads that, there's a poetic term or device. It's called enjambment. Look at this line right here. Now is the time. Okay, he says that a lot. Again, repetition. We could also call that parallel structure. Now is the time to this. Now is the time to that. And it's a nice parallel sequence there, matches, and so it sounds like it just has a good flow to it. But when you read a poem, you don't read every line like a sentence and stop at the end of every line and go to the next line, right? Otherwise, it sounds choppy. So what you do sometimes, you want to lead you want to lead with your voice and with your punctuation without using any punctuation at the. Not that this is a poem, but he reads it like it is in some cases. You want to read at the end of the line to lead the reader's or the listener's eye with your voice and your lack of punctuation into the next line. And so what he does right there, now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time. And then he pauses to make justice. Now we can't know that this is exactly how he wrote it on the page. Somebody typed this and put it on the internet. But I'm guessing it's not all that different, and it's just proof that he knows, anyway, how to use that kind of a poetic device. You can hear it in the way he's reading it. Solid rock of brotherhood, now is the time. He doesn't even acknowledge that there's a period there. And so it leads us, our eye, and the flow of his pace there into that next line, something only a poet knows how to do. Definitely a poet.
Make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment.
Okay. It would be fatal for the nation. Okay. It would be fatal. We know what fatal means, right? Death, dying, death, right? Okay. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. Now, 1963, we don't say fatal without scaring white people. Okay. White people are already scared of anyone who's not white. That was just the reality. Not all, as you can see, there are a lot of white people in that audience, okay, on the side of equality. But Dr. King didn't use a lot of language like that. I'm not saying the guy was a wimp. I mean, this is a man who was willing to fight, put his life on the line. He knew people wanted to kill him. He was willing to march. He went to jail for his, he was no wimp. But Malcolm X used to make fun of him because Malcolm was just all guts, okay? And he was very abrasive. He was tired. He didn't believe in nonviolent protest like Dr. King did. Okay, he didn't believe in going and shooting people up, and he didn't even want people to be armed. But Malcolm believed that, by any means necessary, we're going to get what we want. And he didn't want integration. He wanted segregation. He wanted blacks to have their own communities, their own businesses, their own jobs. Let me have my own schools, our own. He thought maybe that was the way to go, until he started to change his mind a little later, and then they killed him right when he was getting somewhere with. Maybe something that could actually be a little more reasonable. But my point is here that Dr. King was not quite so abrasive as Malcolm X was, and I think he was getting a little tired of Dr. King, or of Malcolm X, making fun of him and saying that he wasn't aggressive enough. Malcolm would call him an Uncle Tom Negro, which just meant that he was too apologetic and too appeasing to the white man. And uh, going back to Uncle Tom's Cabin, a whole history behind that phrase, the Uncle Tom situation. But I think maybe Dr. King was stepping up his game a little bit, tired of being made fun of, to use a word like fatal. Of course, he doesn't mean it literally, but people take things literally. You have to watch what you say, right? Because people believe anything, as we know these last couple of years. They're taking cow medication for COVID, or what, bleach, really? For COVID, drink it, sure. Uh, so people believe a lot of stuff, and he had to be careful how he spoke. You can't just say fatal and expect it to. But I think most smart humans know that fatal for the nation means it ain't going to work for us if we're not, if we don't take on, as he calls it, the urgency of the moment. But that kind of language, again, my point, just to say, he may have been stepping up his game in the assertiveness arena a little bit more because of Malcolm X.
This sweltering summit of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until that is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual.
Okay, you're going to hear him say a lot, those who hope. Okay, when you're writing a speech or an essay, okay, and you know that you have an audience of many different kinds of people, you have to try to address anyone you think is going to see your speech or read your paper. Who is my audience? He knows that in his audience, there are, as he says, those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now just go be content, will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. Meaning, okay, you had your little party, you had your march, the cameras were there, you got to say something, everybody woo-hooed, kumbaya, now go back to work. We gave you your minute, in other words. Those who hope that we just came here and we're going to blow off steam and now go back to business as usual, okay, are going to have a rude awakening if that happens. Who does he mean there? Who would hope that? Who would hope that they just came to blow off steam and, now they'll be okay. Now the little black people will behave, right? Who would hope that? And the whites, again, a lot of white people, in the game here for the cause, like we saw in 2020. We saw it here too. Who would hope that? Well, certainly the security people. This is a nightmare for them, right? The local governments, the police, all white people who are not for this. Okay, you had your party, you had your shindig, your million-man march. Now get out of here, right? That's their attitude. So he doesn't have to identify them by name. He just says, those who hope, you're going to have a rude awakening. So it's very smart. What I want you to think about throughout this whole speech is the audience. How does he address his audience? And those aren't the only people who are in this audience. He has to figure out how to speak to everybody here. And he will. He didn't leave anybody out, as you see. Nice long pause to let them applaud.
There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights.
Now that may
The
sound...
whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges.
Okay, the siren's out my window, not there. Every time I make a video or a Zoom, an ambulance goes up, or a police car. So there will be neither rest nor tranquility until the Negro is granted. And we called, Black people have all these names. Like, we've always just been white, right? But Oprah said it once, and she's like, we've been colored, we've been Black, we've been the Negro, we've been, well, some derogatory, the name always changes. Colored people, and so on. And so back then, the Negro was not, it was just what we used. We tend to say Black more now. I don't know what to feel comfortable with or politically correct with, because I don't think anybody's Black. I don't think anybody's Black. And I mean, although I feel very white sometimes, I don't think anybody's white. And there's a lot of implications to, by the way, give me this minute here. This is fascinating. If you see the Malcolm X film, the Spike Lee film on Malcolm X, when Malcolm goes to prison as a young man, he's converted to Islam in prison. But when he's young and he's in trouble because he's been told his whole life, you'll never be anything, you'll never do anything. No, even though you're at the top of this is Malcolm X. When he's a kid, he was told, even though you're the top of your class, the only Black kid in his class, top of his class, everybody loved him. He was gorgeous. He was funny. He was tall and just a great presence, and he was smart. Even though he'd been troubled. His father was killed by the Ku Klux Klan, some of his uncles too. He struggled. His family was broken up because of that. They couldn't get any money. The mother couldn't take care of all the kids, and so the family was broken up. He was put in an orphanage and foster home. Anyway, only Black kid in his class. He wanted to be a lawyer. He would have been a damn good lawyer too. But everyone told him, you'll never be anything, so he finally got upset, turned to crime out of anger and frustration, was robbing houses, went to prison. In prison, he started reading and educated himself there, okay? See the film. Go watch the Spike Lee Malcolm X movie. Just watch it. Or read the autobiography that it's based on. He reads the dictionary. They tell him, if you want to get out of the prison of your mind, you got to free yourself. Go read the dictionary. And look up white. And then look up Black. What do you see in the white man's dictionary? The white man wrote that, Webster. White, pure, innocent, clean, serene. Black, dark, criminal, dirty, evil. What? Right? And so I struggle with calling people Black or white. But I say Black, I guess, only because that's what we say these days. And I guess I say white for the same reasons. I wish we could just say people. But so in this section, the Negro, when he says that word, the sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. It's not an end but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro needed to come and blow off steam will have a rude awakening. So he's not threatening necessarily, right? He's not scaring anybody, but he is showing that sense of urgency that he needs to keep awake. Business as usual ain't gonna happen, right? We need to do something now. So those who hope that we just came here to have a little party, you wait.
That is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred.
That part just breaks my heart. there's something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold, which leads into the palace of justice. My people, I think we know what he means. Okay. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. And, today we would say that means stop looting the liquor store because you're not helping anything. Okay. When something happens. I get that. You get that, right? But, okay, he's trying to say if you want to be respected, be respectful. But there are a whole lot of black people who've been respectful, and it didn't do them any good. And there are a whole lot of white people who don't know class from their elbows, right? And they don't behave, and they're not respectful, and they still have their basic civil rights. There are a whole lot of idiotic white folk out there who don't live right, and they have what they need. So why should we have to behave? That wasn't his word. We must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. That part just boils my blood, to tell you the truth, because I feel he shouldn't have to say that. This is not about my opinion, though, so I'll stop there. But we get what he's saying. I'd love to know your thoughts. Take notes if you want to, and share them with me. But you don't have to be a saint to have basic human rights in America. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. Fine. Okay. We see where he's going. Again, a beautiful sentiment, but is it fair? I know, life isn't fair for everyone.
We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny.
This is so important. Look at the audience. Okay. Look at this passage. Here. Okay. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community. Now, if you have not learned about Malcolm X and the Black Panthers, or Malcolm belonged to the Nation of Islam, which was a group led by Elijah Muhammad, who thought himself a prophet for the religion of Islam, and he was the Muslim community, and those who follow Islam are called Muslims, right? You probably know that. What they felt was that the religion of Islam seemed to fit their lives better. So they're following this religion, with this Elijah Muhammad. They call themselves the Nation of Islam. And yes, they marched and protested and so on. Malcolm was one of the leaders of this group. And it was a little more assertive and aggressive than the nonviolent protests that Dr. King followed. And what I love about his passage here is he doesn't, Malcolm made fun of Dr. King's speech. He made fun of the I Have a Dream speech. Okay, like that's going to do anything. He said, well, oh yeah, everybody kumbaya, and it goes back to nothing. Well, Dr. King didn't say that about Malcolm X and his group. He's called it the marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community. What he means by militancy is that, again, they almost felt like an army of people who were going to march the streets and fight for their beliefs. And he doesn't insult them. Where's the lesson for us? If you're going to try to be persuasive, you can't just attack the other side and insult them like we saw a lot of between 2016 and 2020. That was a lot of insulting. name calling, nicknames, and that's not how you do it. If you want to be persuasive, you have to embrace, or not embrace, but acknowledge, at least acknowledge the other side, acknowledge their viewpoint, and then bring people over to your side with facts and knowledge and credibility, some pathos, some ethos, right? Not just bullying. And so this here, the marvelous new militancy, which has engulfed the Negro community, he's treating the opposition with respect, and then he says, uh, must not lead us to distrust all white people, because a lot of those groups were saying, that we need to separate from the white devil and all that kind of thing, and he's saying, well, we can't distrust all white people. Look, a lot of white people are here now. And so when he says here that we can't distrust all white people, look, they showed up here today. Imagine you're in the audience and you're a white person, and now you may have felt a little awkward being there. Like maybe the other black folks were looking at you like, what are you doing here? He gets them a round of applause. Look, they're here. They just want to help. And they clap. So he finds a way to throughout the speech to include everyone. And everyone leaves feeling counted. Let's see who else he includes. Watch how he does this. It's brilliant. I know this is long, but it's worth it.
They have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality.
There are those, there it is again, there are those who are asking, when will you be satisfied? Who does he mean there by there are those who are asking, when will you be satisfied? I know what you're saying. Some of you are saying the government, white people. Who else? The police. Yes. How about this, though? When will you be satisfied? What are they asking for? What are black folks asking for in this era? Okay, equality and the right to vote. What else? I'm talking about a day-to-day life. What are they asking for that will make their day-to-day lives better? Okay, get up in the morning and go to work. Yeah, I want a job. I want my own business. I want to own my own business. If I'm a black person, right? I want to own my own business. I don't need to always work for somebody else. Or I want to go to school in my own neighborhood without having to take the bus to, some ethnic ghetto that white society planned for us, right? I want to live in an apartment or a home that I choose or that I buy myself. Landlords, school administrators, those who hope, or those who ask, when will you be satisfied? Schools, school districts, okay? Employers who won't hire you because you're black. Realtors who won't show you the house because you're black, right? These are the people that he's talking to, or talking about, therefore talking to. Those who hope, or those who say, when will you be satisfied? You're free, you're not a slave anymore. What more do you want? I want to live like a normal, free human being with decent options before me, right? Okay.
We can never be satisfied.
And police brutality.
As long as our body is heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the city.
Imagine this, 1950s, the golden era, the golden age of music and film, okay? Because now everybody's got a TV in their house. Everybody loves Nat King Cole and Sammy Davis Jr. and Muhammad Ali, the boxer. Everybody loves these entertainers, but they can't get a milkshake on the road. They can't stay in the same room as their crew. or they're bus drivers. You know what Muhammad Ali did after he won the Olympic gold medal? He came back to the US and couldn't get a milkshake in a diner. He took his Olympic gold medal and threw it in the Ohio River. What good is it? I'm fighting for you. I'm fighting for this country. You ain't fighting for me, right? Muhammad Ali's another one. These stories are endlessly fascinating. I don't know how anybody could get bored. Uh, okay. And he joined the Nation of Islam as well. Muhammad Ali did. He said, I'm not going to Vietnam to fight for you. You're going to send me, a black man, to go kill brown men for white men who never did a damn thing for me. That ain't happening. They took his boxing license away from him. He, conscientious objector on the basis of his religion. Now that he became a Muslim, friends with Malcolm X. At first, there was a falling out there, but yeah. So Muhammad Ali, most famous face on earth around this time, most famous face on earth, became a Muslim. That's how he got that name, Muhammad Ali. He was Cassius Clay before that, and they made him one of the leaders. Anyway, so we're not asking for a lot, but don't expect us to be satisfied when we can't get a hotel room, yet you love what we do, white America. We're getting there.
We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only.
Again, that repetition, that parallel structure of the phrases.
We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote, and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
All right, now that almost feels like an ending. Where do you go from there? It feels like an ending. He could have stopped there, right? But now, at that point in the speech, or if it's an essay, you have to think about, as the writer, as he's had to do, who haven't I addressed yet in my audience? Who is still left out? Who do I need to talk to or about? And this is where he goes next.
I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells.
Narrow jail cells.
Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution, staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering.
Okay, that passage, he has to include those who have hit rock bottom, those who have been in prison, maybe because they did something wrong, but a whole lot of people were only in prison because they were black. We know that's true. Okay, a lot of people got in prison, jailed for stupid things that white people never would have been in prison for, right? Some people were just criminals, yes. Okay, but anyway, when your life is this hard, I'd like to see you avoid it, right? For some people who've been beaten and told they'd never be anything and they'd never have anything, and they're poor and their parents are mad at the world because of what they've suffered, and then they're mad at the world because of what they've suffered, then their kids are mad at the world for what they've suffered, and the suffering continues, and we're just supposed to fix that overnight. It takes generations to fix what we've done to these people as a nation. Right. And so, yeah, it's a lot of these people, as he says, have come from narrow jail cells, have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering, he says. So he knows that there are people out there who are just down. They showed up, but they don't know what they're doing or what they're going to do. I don't know what the next day brings, right? Some people just, I don't know. I have nothing, and I don't know how to get out of the hole I'm in, right? He speaks even to those people. Nobody is left out here.
Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemption.
Okay, now continue to. He's telling them a direct order of what to do. This is the call to action part. Now he's going to tell them what to do. This is where the energy, you can see it's coming to an end. The peak should be right about here energy wise, where you start lifting the energy to become more persuasive. You have to pick it up at some point, right? And here comes the energy. He's going to raise his voice, the call to action. This is what I want you to do, he's saying right here.
Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina. Go back to Georgia. Go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities. Knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friend,
Watch how he's going to either be reading or not in this next section. They say he started to improvise here. And this is the
so
most
even
famous part.
though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
Now, what's he doing there? He's citing. What are you supposed to do when you write a persuasive essay or speech? You're supposed to use sources, right? You're supposed to use sources, other material from other people to add depth to your paper to say, or to your speech, and to say, if you say this, you say that, this is what I say. They say this, I say that. You put sources, quotes, interviews, articles, right, into your paper. He's citing the country of America. He's citing the texts of our land. He's citing the founding fathers' words. He's quoting the founding fathers. Brilliant. Those are his sources. This is what you said, founding fathers, America. He's holding us to it. We hold this truth to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Hello, right?
I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream. My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Now, if he didn't practice that, then I'm an elephant with purple spots. I mean, I just wouldn't believe it. Because look at the way he read that. He throws his head back like a poet. No, not like a poet, like a horn player or like a musician. They've got a part to play. They take a deep breath, not too deep, because then you can't hold the note. I know that because I'm a singer. You can't just go and then do it. You're going to lose your breath faster than if you didn't take a breath at all. But he takes that, my four little children will one day live in a nation where, and he rattles that off like a horn part, like a melody, like a hook in a song. It's brilliant, perfectly executed, and I would never believe anybody who told me that wasn't planned. That had to be.
My poor little children
Right here.
will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
That's why it's famous. It's perfect.
I have a dream that one day down in Alabama with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification.
That took guts to say.
One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white
Imagery.
girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream.
Imagery. That image of them holding hands. Perfect. Gotta have some imagery. Make us see pictures you want us to see. Brilliant.
I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted. Every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together.
A good rap or
This
something.
is our hope.
Great.
This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith,
we
will
this
be
faith.
able to work together, to pray
Persuasive.
together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free
To this
one day.
together, to do that together, to do this together.
This will be the
Parallel
day.
structure.
This will be the day when all of God's children be able to sing with new meaning, my country tears of thee.
Citing the
Sweet
country again.
land of liberty of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the hiking Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies.
He knows a lot of people are watching on TV. They're not there. So he could speak even to them. Make them, even as an audience, feel included.
Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Look at that exit. Watch the way he leaves like a rock star. He doesn't stop and say, thank you for listening, thank you. He just says his last line, and it's like he's leaving, and he's saying, come on, follow me, let's go. Here we go, let's go do it. He just walks off. It's brilliant. Okay, that's all I got. I hope you learned something.